Nottingham Forest were handed a 4-point deduction in the Premier League for breaching the profit and sustainability rules after having an overspend of about £34.5 million as compared to Everton's £19.5 million overspend. And yet, it all appears, at least until this point in time, that it is Nottingham Forest that have got the lesser sentence, despite having spent way more as compared to Everton. And here is why I think Everton and Everton fans will feel hard done by this latest decision by the Premier League. Hey, welcome back to the Football Tribe YouTube channel. Robert K. Sarkos is my name. To all our subscribers, thank you so much. If you're new here, do not forget to subscribe, like and comment on this video. Anyway, yes, in the latest decision, as far as the Premier League goes in cracking down on clubs overspending or not meeting the profit and sustainability rules, Nottingham Forest have been given a 4-point deduction, which sends them into the relegation zone. 4 points only after it was discovered that they spent or they overspent by £34.5 million as far as their books go. Remember, earlier on in the season, Everton were deducted 10 points, an overspend of £19.5 million. Yes, they did appeal that decision because they didn't agree with the judgment of the Independent Premier League Committee, and that 10-point deduction was reduced to just 6. And yet, whereas they welcomed the reduction in terms of sentence, they also still remained feeling hard done by, not well listened to as far as the scope of their factors go. In the case of Nottingham Forest, they did argue their case that there were mitigating factors that led to this overspend. First of all, they argued their late promotion, having gone through the playoffs to achieve promotion to the Premier League. That was prior to the start of last season. And once they came into the Premier League, while still in Championship, they had a lot of players on their books that were loan players who had to go back to their parent clubs. What did that mean? It meant that they had to spend a lot of money in acquiring their own players and players that could be able to compete in the Premier League and help them stay in the Premier League. They went on to buy as many as 22 players. Yes, that was under the charges of Steve Cooper, who has since been let go of his duties and replaced by Nuno Espirito Santo. £150 million is how much they spent to assemble that squad. And indeed, it did yield results because they managed to stay in the top of the Premier League. And now, they are here this season. All signs indicate they're still battling relegation, but it doesn't negate the fact that they did breach the Premier League rules. Now, usually, the rules also highlight that over a course of 3 years, you shouldn't have be making huge losses that could amount to about £105 million. And yet Nottingham Forest have only been in the Premier League. This is their second year. Now their losses date as far back as the Championship, where it is reported that they recorded about losses of about £61 million. But the gist is on the decision. They overspent by £34.5 million, while Everton overspent by a mere £19.5 million. When you do the math, about £14 million in what Nottingham Forest spent as compared to Everton. And yet it is Nottingham Forest that have got the lesser punishment. Now, according to the Premier League, they say that Nottingham Forest were fully 100% cooperative with their investigation or with this case. Be that as of it may, Everton did argue the same case. They said they were transparent with the investigation. They put all their cards on the table. They argued out their case, which included, but not limited to, the construction of a new stadium, the deal that fell through over the naming rights of their ground when the Ukraine-Russia war or conflict started. they lost about a deal that was in the region of £200 million, and among other factors. Whereas their 10-point deduction was further reduced to 6. This 6 versus 4 in Everton versus Nottingham Forest comparison, Everton fans will feel hard done by in this particular case. They'll feel perhaps their decision or their judgment was a little more harsh as compared to Nottingham Forest. Personally, I think it is the case that Everton got the hard end of the stick, while it seems that Nottingham Forest are walking away with a slap on the wrist. First of all, according to experts across the Premier League, they do say that these rules seem a bit ambiguous. Why? Because clearly they do not highlight any particular penalties that will be dished out to clubs that are found guilty of breaking the profit and sustainability rules. For example, they do not state that if a club is found in breach of these rules, they'll have a 3-point deduction or 5-point deduction. And then if the amount of overspend is within this region, let's say 0 to 10 million pounds, then they will have a further 2-point deduction. And if it is above between 10 and 20 million pounds, it will be a 3-point deduction, etc, etc. All that is not highlighted in the penalties or the possible consequences for a breach of these rules. So where does that leave it? It leaves it to human judgment and common sense, perhaps. Now, whereas humans may be able to disabuse themselves of any bias whatsoever under the name independent committee, you can never rule out that perhaps humans could be swayed. I'm not saying they were swayed in this particular case, or that they had a softer feel for one team over the other. In any case, they didn't look at both cases in comparison of one another. Both were looked at as independent cases. But nonetheless, when you compare the outcomes of the two judgments, you do feel that Everton were done by in that decision. Both clubs will be fighting relegation. They will be fighting to stay in the Premier League. Now, one would argue that whatever the case ends at the end of the season, if they drop, so be it. That will be their fate. But should the fate of football be determined inside boardrooms? Yes and no. Perhaps there got to be consequences for breach of rules. But also, how do we make sure that what goes on in the financial side of football does not affect, at least either directly or indirectly, in terms of what happens on the pitch? It's hard to draw a line between the two because it's money that is used to buy players and players determine results on the pitch. So it's a gray area, a bit of a gray area. Nonetheless, when it comes to the comparison of these two clubs, Everton will feel it was a bit too harsh for them, especially bearing in mind that, quote unquote, they could have been taken as first-time offenders. Never mind that there are still 115 charges that haven't been heard pending against Manchester City in regards to the breach of similar rules. That case, I don't know. If I told you when it will be heard, I'll be lying because I do not know. Perhaps soon, or maybe even later. But we will wait because it looks like the two cases of Nottingham Forest and Everton have been handled quite expeditiously, while that of Man City seems to be seated, collecting dust somewhere on the table. What's happening in the Premier League? We do not know. Your guess is as good as mine. But nonetheless, if you're an Everton fan, I would feel aggrieved that we spent £19.5 million as compared to £34.5 million in comparison to Nottingham Forest, and yet we still got the harder decision. If I were an Everton fan, that's how I would feel. And I would be clearly justified. Perhaps this precedent should task the Premier League to go back and have a look at those rules, have a review, have a sit down with themselves and say, and also set, and not just to improve the rules, but also to set clear penalties for any club or that may be found in breach of these very rules. What do you think? Those are my views. Thank you for taking the time. Robert Kesako is my name. Stay blessed. Have a wonderful evening.